So the first thing to, I think, understand is that it can be kind of intimidating to think about going out and talking to strangers on a canvas or trying to organize workers in a workplace or things like that. But anybody, if you put in the time and get the proper skills training, can become an accomplished organizer. Sometimes we like to think that only a certain personality is going to be good for to be an organizer, or you have to have certain talents. But really, anybody can learn to do it. And especially in a setting like unions, all kinds of people of different education and experience levels become extremely effective organizers with their coworkers and neighbors. Another important ground rule to keep in mind is that while a lot of organizers like to talk at people, the most important thing is to really listen to people. So you should be talking 30% and listening 70%, or 25%, 75%, where the bulk of the organizing conversation should be you listening to the person that you're talking to. And of course, successful organizing relies on building real relationships with people. So the sort of things that make any functional human relationship work in a healthy way is going to be what you're aiming for. So integrity, mutual accountability, and face-to-face interactions. These are going to be the important aspects of building a real relationship with people through the organizing conversation. Secondly, going into the organizing conversation with a personal narrative is going to be important. A personal narrative is just kind of based on your lived experience, where you're coming from, why you're talking to the person. The personal narrative should answer two basic questions that people are going to have. If you're just knocking on their door in the neighborhood, why are you here talking to me, and why are you fighting for what you're talking to me about? So having a personal narrative is about having kind of condensing your reasons for doing what you're doing, and why you feel like it's important to fight for whatever campaign you're supporting. And just briefly, as a socialist organization, being a socialist is kind of part of that personal narrative. So I think that it's very helpful to try to very briefly condense just a kind of statement of how you became a socialist, why you're a socialist, without sort of lapsing into the sort of jargon that a lot of the time socialists like to talk with. Now, at the same time, you don't necessarily need to get into ideological ideas in the middle of a field canvas. So the socialist demand for Medicare for all can be described in very concrete ways that don't have to be abstract and academic. So I think sticking with concrete explanations and introductions is important for introducing socialism.
Could you give an example of each, the difference between concrete and legislative?
Yeah, I think the abstract would be, I'm a socialist because I believe in the sort of one-day emancipation of the working class to do the, seize the means of production, blah, 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 which of course is true, and, we're proud of that. But, I think in more concrete terms, telling the story of how you were radicalized, how you came around to being involved in socialist politics, or for me personally, I've been involved in labor struggles in the workplace, which have had a huge formative experience in my politics. So trying to sort of fight for a world of radical equality and democracy kind of comes out of my experience as a working person, and the sort of struggles that we all face that are common and universal. In this case, around healthcare, but of course as workers or citizens. That kind of thing.
Just speaking of healthcare for all, in and of itself is the concrete.
Yeah, I think it can be. Yeah, absolutely. But just do it in a concrete way instead of these kind of academic explanations that a lot of times leftists like to speak with. Now to get into the mechanics a little bit of the organizing conversation. It's kind of broken down into separate parts. I'm going to try to go kind of quickly. first of all, you just want to introduce yourself, right? Just the introduction, straightforward. State your name and your organizational affiliation, and try to introduce yourself in a way that connects you with the person. So if you're canvassing in your own neighborhood, you can introduce yourself as their neighbor, right? Of course, if it's a workplace organizing, you can introduce yourself as their coworker. So whatever, it's always helpful to establish yourself not as a kind of like cynical door-to-door salesman, but as somebody who's actually engaged with the person on that level. Second of all, you want to start asking what are called open-ended questions. There are basically two kinds of questions. One is closed, one is open. A closed question is a question that the person can answer just by saying yes or no, and then it cuts off the conversation. So you want open-ended questions that to answer require a more conversational sort of engagement, where it gets the person to open up and start talking about their experiences. So, these questions can be specifically oriented to the context, like people's experience around healthcare. You could start asking open-ended questions around that. There's a list of pretty good examples here on the handout. If you're doing a anti-gentrification campaign, you could ask, how they feel about the way that their neighborhood has changed, or how they feel about the developments that have happened in their neighborhood. If you're doing anti-police brutality, you could ask people what their experience has been with the NOPD, and what their relationship in the community is with the NOPD, et cetera, et cetera. Another good thing to ask too, that's kind of an open-ended question is, what would it mean for your family, or for you, or for your children, or for your grandchildren if we had Medicare for all, or if you had a union in your workplace, or whatever the issue is. Like, how would it impact your life in a positive way? Like, what would it mean to you? So that can get people thinking and kind of responding, opening up about it, and you can start to have a conversation. The next step is you want to start agitating people once you've kind of opened up with the open-ended questions. This is pretty straightforward. It kind of just sounds like what it is. Trying to fire up the person by asking pointed questions. Do you think this is right? Do you think that, the people near, at City Hall have to deal with, whatever the state of affairs is, this pothole in the middle of your street, or do you think that the mayor has to worry about, food stamps, or not being able to pay the premium for health insurance, et cetera? Pretty straightforward. I mean, just the object being to kind of just fire up the person and move them toward the next section, which is called calling the question. So you kind of want to agitate to a kind of climax, and then call the question, which is kind of a call to action, basically. So it's basically the point at which you say, like, okay, are you ready to stand with your neighbors or your coworkers to take a stand to fight for the union, or to fight for Medicare for all? And you just kind of, that's when you sort of ask that question and kind of ask for a commitment, right? So up to this whole point in the conversation, you haven't even, asked for a commitment yet, because you've been having the organizing conversation. And this is the point at which you do that. Now, assuming that the person says yes, you can move on to the next section, which is called inoculation. Does anybody know what inoculation means from the medical world? Definition, anybody?
Essentially vaccination.
Essentially vaccination. So in this case, like inoculation is a metaphor, and you're trying to vaccinate people against basically the haters who are going to tell them that it's impossible, right? Or that it's, it's utopian to, in a deep red state to demand basic, human rights. So you're going to try to inoculate people against the naysayers and also the opposition's arguments that they're going to make. So these are the two kind of things that you want to reflect on with the person in this section. And this is pretty important. for so many reasons. I mean, first of all, just because if somebody's already gone through and thought through the sort of arguments that they're going to get and sort of arguments that are going to try to undermine, resolve to fight for Medicare for all or whatever the reform is. They're gonna remember. I've already thought about this. I've already talked to the organizer about it. I knew they were going to say this, and it kind of takes the wind out of the sails of any kind of oppositional arguments. I've been involved in labor struggles where the failure to inoculate properly, even though everybody was super excited about the union and at the meetings and stuff, but the failure to inoculate really made the support crumble at the moment of truth, like on the shop floor when you're trying to take a direct action, because people hadn't really worked through together in a collective way the real reality of what kinds of messages and hate they were going to get from the boss, right? So preparing people to understand that, and preparing people to understand they have to fight for it through inoculation is crucial. So for some examples, just very briefly, you could talk about how some people say, that there's no way we can win this fight, that it's impossible utopian, et cetera. But here are some actual examples of successful campaigns, that have actually happened. These countries have, plenty of Western countries in Europe and et cetera. Most developed countries in the world have some form of universal health care. This is not utopian, it's something that exists, and we're the anomaly, right? You can always mention that politicians and pharmaceutical companies and lobbyists are always going to say that, they can't afford to give you universal health care. Of course, the objective is to force them to, right? And for a workplace example, you could ask, what do you think the boss is going to do when they hear that you guys have been unionized? Let's think through what the boss is likely to react, how they're going to react. And of course, bosses often take negative or positive reactions when somebody's, when a union pops up in their business. So that they could either try to bribe the workers to kind of make them anti-union, or they could intimidate the workers or fire the workers. I think that in this case, in the context of healthcare, there's going to be politicians who are going to say, get out of here, this is insane, right? It's going to be the kind of negative side. But then, of course, there's always going to be opportunists, like you guys were talking about, who are going to speak, out of both sides of the mouth at the same time. Talk about universal health care in vague terms while supporting a lesser measure. I think Elizabeth Warren is actually a good example of this in real time because she kind of has that dynamic going. So I think that that kind of conversation has to happen during this inoculation thing, and it's important in this context for maintaining a sense of independence and an understanding that the power to pass this kind of a reform is going to have to come through, mass action and mass organization, and that these politicians are going to either promise stuff or reject it, but it's going to be up to us, not up to anybody else, to do it. Now, kind of in closing the organizer conversation, you want to try to get a sense of what we call organic leaders. So you're going to try to identify other leaders in the community, in the neighborhood, in the workplace, or in whatever social landscape you're in. Now, of course, this is important kind of for strategic reasons moving forward for a campaign, because you're trying to, an organic leader is a sort of natural leader in a community that people go to and that people respect, just naturally. Not an elected thing, not a formal thing, just the people that people trust and the people that people go to. So in a workplace, it'd be perhaps somebody who's worked there for a long time, who kind of helps bring in people who are new, kind of get them up to speed about the way that things work in the place. In a community, it could be kind of a neighborhood elder. Maybe they take care of everybody's kids when people have to go to work, stuff like that. So trying to understand and kind of map out who those organic leaders are in any kind of a campaign context is going to be crucial, because oftentimes, just finding the right person who knows everybody in a neighborhood or in a workplace can make or break your ability to organize a successful campaign. So there's a lot of like power. There's organic interpersonal networks that exist in working class communities and in workplaces, and trying to understand what those look like, and again, try to identify the organic leaders is going to be very important. So in the conversation itself, you can ask, who do you trust the most in your workplace or in your neighborhood? Who do you think I should talk to? Who do you go to when you have a question or a problem? And who watches people skits for them when they go to work? And then lastly, the last section is just about following up. So like at the end of the organizer conversation, you want to try to create some kind of a plan with the person, so that your interactions are not just cut off in this one organizing conversation. You want to set up a plan for further action. And ideally, you want to get the person to actually become active in the campaign itself. So you can, for instance, try to plug somebody into concrete activity by asking the person to perform a simple or easily achievable task. It could be as simple as, can you think of 2 or 3 people, in your neighborhood or in your workplace that you could call to talk about what we talked about today? Maybe you could get them in touch with me, have them call me. This is not a difficult or lengthy task for somebody to do, but of course, if they actually do it, then it shows that they're seriously interested in getting involved and capable of maybe taking on more, going forward. Yeah. And of course, it's good to be as detailed as possible when making these follow-up plans. You want to be specific and not just a sort of, well, see you around, that's our follow-up. But trying to be specific.